The Titans were a cycle of creatures in the 2011 core set. Each color got one of these cards, and they each had an ability that triggered whenever they entered the battlefield or attacked that was based off of what the color was known for doing. So today, we're going to go over some of the best cards with Titan-like abilities, as in they trigger whenever they enter the battlefield or attack, including the original Titans themselves. Starting us off at number 10, we have Glint-Sleeve Siphoner. This is a 2/1 human rogue with a mana cost of 1 and 1 black with Menace, meaning it can't be blocked except with 2 or more creatures. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you get an energy counter, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you can pay 2 energy, and if you do, you draw a card and lose 1 life. Glint-Sleeve is a great mid-range creature, both at putting out pressure and refueling your hand. It does require you to have energy, but the card is more than competent enough at making you energy on its own. Menace allows it to attack without fear of being blocked a lot, so the card will usually be able to make an energy every turn if it's on the field. This means it will usually draw you a card every other turn, which is more than enough to make the card good in formats like Standard or Pioneer. Of course, this is assuming you don't have any other ways to make energy. Energy was really strong back in Standard, thanks in no small part to Winding Constrictor. This is a 2-mana 2/3 that gives both permanents and players an extra counter whenever they have a counter put on them. With Siphoner, this allows you to get 2 energies every turn, which in turn means you can draw a card every single turn. While this energy was great, Siphoner has proven itself strong enough to see play without any other energy. In Standard, it saw play in a variety of energy decks and some run-of-the-mill mid-range decks, and the story is the same in Pioneer. Glint-Sleeve has the worst Titan-like ability on this list, so it's not surprising at the bottom spot at only number 10. And at number 9, we have Tovolar's Huntmaster. This is a 6/6 human werewolf with a mana cost of 4 and 2 green. It has the ability where, when it enters the battlefield, you create 2 2/2 green wolf creature tokens. It also has Daybound, meaning it's on its front face during the day and the backside during the night. So, how does day and night work? Once a card starts the day-night cycle, it will change from day to night at the start of the next turn if someone doesn't cast any spells on their turn, and will change from night to day at the start of the next turn if a player casts 2 or more spells on their turn. These cards will actually enter the battlefield on the transform side if it's night when they enter the battlefield. The transform side is Tovolar's Pack Leader, a 7/7 werewolf with the same Titan ability, and the ability where you can pay 2 and 2 green to have another wolf or werewolf fight target creature you don't control, which means they each deal damage equal to their power to each other. Huntmaster didn't really see any play in its respective Standard format, only showing up occasionally in green aggro or mid-range decks. However, the card has made a big splash in Pioneer thanks to Winota, Joiner of Forces. Winota is a 4/4 legendary creature with a mana cost of 2, 1 red, and 1 white, with the ability where, whenever a non-human creature you control attacks, you look at the top 7 cards of your library and put a human from among them onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. That creature gains indestructible for the rest of the turn, meaning it can't be destroyed by damage or destroy effects, and you throw the rest of the cards at the bottom of your deck in a random order. Winota on her own is a pretty crazy card, and Huntmaster is just a great card to pair with her. Not only does it let you get 10 power worth of creatures on turn 4, but the wolves will trigger Winota's ability when they attack, letting you play even more humans from the top of your deck. Winota is a card that you kind of have to kill as soon as it's played, or else you just lose, and Huntmaster is just one of the best cards to play alongside her. And at number 8, we have Graveyard Trespasser. This is a 3/3 human werewolf with a mana cost of 2 and 1 black. It has Ward, discard a card, meaning whenever your opponent targets it with a spell or ability, you counter that spell or ability unless they discard a card. And it has the ability where, whenever it attacks, you exile up to 1 card from a graveyard, and if it was a creature card, your opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. It also has Daybound, similar to Huntmaster, so at night it will transform into Graveyard Glutton, a 4/4 werewolf with Ward, discard a card, and the ability where, whenever it attacks, you exile up to 2 target cards from graveyards, then drain 1 life from your opponent for each creature card exiled this way. This card is really useful in a whole bunch of different matchups. It's a good threat that annoys control by making them 2 for 1 themselves to get rid of it, can mess with tons of combo decks by getting rid of key cards in the graveyard, and it's good against aggro decks because it can gain you extra life and contest the board. Even if this card dies as soon as it enters the battlefield, you'll still get some value off of it, as killing it at that point won't stop its triggering from resolving. This is part of what makes these Titan abilities so good. They get some value as soon as you play them, and generate more and more every turn if they don't die right away, leaving your opponent in a bad spot no matter what. Now, werewolves are notoriously finicky, and getting them to stay on their backside is rare. Luckily, the front side of Trespasser is good enough for the card to see some play. If you get to attack with the backside, it goes from good to excellent. A 3 mana 4/4 is a good rate for a creature, rather than an average one, and the upgraded version of the ability is also good. All this together made Trespasser a great threat in black-red aggro and mid-range decks in Pioneer. This card hasn't quite seen play in any older formats, however. And at number 7, we have Sun Titan. This is a 6/6 giant with a mana cost of 4 and 2 white. It has Vigilance, meaning it doesn't have to tap to attack, and whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you return target permanent card with a mana value of 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is the first card of the original Titan cycle on this list, though it won't be the last. This ability is actually incredibly versatile, as there are a ton of different cards that this card can snag out of your graveyard for you. Lands always have a mana value of 0, so it can grab those back for you if you throw any away. Cards like Skyclave Apparition can act as a form of removal. Tons of cards like Wall of Omens can let you draw a card, or even better, cards like Ranger Captain of Eos can search a library for a creature card with a mana value of 1 and put it into your hand. While having so many options is great, this doesn't get around the issue that Sun Titan costs a ton of mana to play. In standard, mid-range, and control decks were able to slow down the game enough to play Sun Titan with no issue. However, in formats like Modern, this is a lot harder. Despite this, Sun Titan has consistently seen a very small amount of play in decks that were playing lots of interaction and board wipes to slow down the game. Seeing play, even very small amounts of play, in Modern is extremely impressive for such an expensive card, and is generally a sign of just how strong that card is once it comes down. And at number 6, we have Inferno Titan. This is a 6/6 giant with a mana cost of 4 and 2 red. It has the ability where you can pay 1 red to give it +1/+0 until the end of the turn, and whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you deal 3 damage divided as you choose amongst 1, 2, or 3 targets. Inferno Titan is a really strong threat that can put a lot of pressure out really quickly. The 3 damage can clean up a lot of creatures, and combining that with the ability to pump itself, called Fire Breathing by the community, can let you kill your opponent as little as 2 attacks. Now, this usually wouldn't be enough to make the card get on this list, as this is often actually weaker than Sun Titan on the battlefield. However, Inferno takes less work to make strong, as you don't have to put anything in your graveyard, and being a red made it easier to cast for one very specific deck. That deck was Gruul Ponza. This is a green-red deck that was built around getting lots of mana and denying your opponent mana. It would play cards like Pillage and Mwambali Acid Moss to destroy your opponent's lands. However, the more important card for Inferno Titan are Arbor Elf and Utopia Sprawl. Arbor Elf is a 1-mana 1/1 that you can tap to untap target forest. Utopia Sprawl is an enchantment aura that you can attach to a forest, and as it enters the battlefield, you choose a color. Whenever you tap the enchanted land, you add 1 mana of the chosen color. With this, you can make 4 mana on turn 2, enough for an Acid Moss to put you extremely far ahead. These cards can let you play Inferno Titan as early as turn 3, and start destroying your opponent's creatures and pressuring their life total. Now, Ponza was a pretty strong deck, but it's shifted in focus over the years. It started playing a few less land destruction spells and a few more threats, but the idea has remained largely the same. Inferno Titan has seen less play as better cards have gotten printed for the deck, but it's still seen more than its fair share of play. And at number 5, we have Korvold, Fae-Cursed King. This is a 4/4 legendary dragon noble with a mana cost of 2, 1 black, 1 red, and 1 green. It has flying, meaning it can't be blocked by creatures without flying or reach. It has the abilities where, when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you sacrifice another permanent, and another ability where, whenever you sacrifice a permanent, you draw a card and put a +1/+1 counter on Korvold. Korvold is a great value generator, as long as you're able to sacrifice permanents without hurting yourself too much. Luckily, there are tons of decks that specialize in exactly this. 2 cards that go great with this card are Cauldron Familiar and Witch's Oven. Familiar is a 1/1 cat that costs 1 black mana, and it has the abilities where, when it enters the battlefield, your opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, and you can sacrifice a food token to return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. Foods are artifact tokens where you can pay 2, tap, and sacrifice them to gain 3 life. Witch's Oven is a 1-mana artifact with the ability where you can tap it and sacrifice a creature to make a food token. What players would do is sacrifice cat to oven to make a food, and then sacrifice the food to cat to bring it back to the battlefield. This would basically just give you 1 life and 1 damage to your opponent, but with additional synergies, it was very strong. Korvold made this loop much better, as it would get 2 counters and let you draw 2 cards each time you did the loop. Even if you can only do this loop once a turn, because the oven stays tapped, drawing 2 cards off of it is a huge amount of value. Combining this loop with a card like Mayhem Devil, which deals 1 damage to any target anytime you sacrifice any permanents, gives you a deck that could generate way too much value, not to mention that stopping the cat oven loop is fairly difficult. This forms the basis of a very strong deck in Pioneer called Jund Sacrifice. Now, Korvold doesn't really see any play in Modern or Legacy. For anyone wondering why this card is over cards like Inferno Titan, which does see play in Modern, a more powerful format than Pioneer, the reason is that Korvold is actually unique in what it gives these Jund Sacrifice decks, whereas Inferno Titan could be replaced with any other similar cards. And at number 4, we have Archon of Cruelty. This is a 6/6 Archon with a mana cost of 6 and 2 black. It has flying and the ability where, whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, target opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, discards a card, and loses 3 life, and then you draw a card and gain 3 life. Archon has a ridiculous ability that gets you a ton of card advantage as soon as it enters the battlefield. In total, you end up getting 3 cards worth of value off the trigger, and this happens every single turn if you keep it around. Now, 8 mana is a lot more than 6 mana. Not only does it take more turns to play 8 lands, but it means you have to draw all 8 of those lands. This is extremely difficult to do without simply flooding out and dying before you can even get to turn 8. Luckily, there are tons of ways of cheating out big threats like Archon. Cards like Persist allow you to put a creature card from your graveyard directly into the battlefield. All you have to do is find a way to dump them into the graveyard first. There are tons of cards like Entomb and Faithless Looting which do this job fine. The combination of all of this value and how easy it is to reanimate has made the card a pretty constant inclusion in Legacy Reanimator decks. However, these decks haven't really worked out in Modern. Instead, people use cards like Transmography to cheat it out. Transmography is a source with a mana cost of 3 and 1 red, with the effect where you exile target creature, then its controller reveals cards from the top of their deck until they reveal a creature card and put that card into the battlefield, then shuffle the rest into the library. If the only creatures in your deck are cards like Archon, you can know that you'll always hit a huge threat off of your Transmography. At that point, the issue is getting the creature to exile in the first place, but token generators like Hard Evidence can fill that role. So, while the exact ways the card sees play is different in different formats, Archon has put in work in multiple formats as the payoff for combo decks. And at number 3, we have Kroxa, Titan of Death's Hunger. This is a 6/6 Elder Giant with a mana cost of 1 black and 1 red. It has the ability where you can pay 2 black and 2 red and exile 5 other cards from your graveyard to escape it, which means cast it from your graveyard. It has the abilities where, when it enters the battlefield, you sacrifice it unless it escaped. And whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, each opponent discards a card, then each opponent who didn't discard a non-land card loses 3 life. Kroxa is a great card for grinding out advantage in the late game. When you play it from your hand, it isn't all that impressive, as it just gets the worst card out of your opponent's hand. However, it also basically draws you back half of Kroxa, allowing you to cast it from your graveyard. So it's almost a 2-for-1. Of course, escaping it from your graveyard is the real attraction here. Even if your opponent can kill Kroxa, it can just come back again and again, as long as you get enough cards to exile to its ability. Now, late in the game, your opponent might not have too many cards to discard, but the extra damage is fine on its own. And besides, you don't really need the extra card advantage on a card that lets you get a 6/6 for 4 mana over and over throughout the game. Getting rid of Kroxa is extremely difficult as well, as most forms of removal will only destroy the card, allowing them to cast it again. You need specific cards that exile it to deal with the card forever, and exile removal always has extra downsides to compensate how strong exiling is. All of this together has led Kroxa being a staple in black-red midrange decks in formats like Pioneer and Modern. And at number 2, we have Primeval Titan. This is a 6/6 giant with a mana cost of 4 and 2 green. It has trample, meaning it can deal excess combat damage to a defending player or planeswalker, and whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you search your library for 2 land cards, put them onto the battlefield tap, then shuffle. Primeval Titan, or better known as Primetime, is the basis of an entire deck in Modern. You see, there are actually a ton of lands that can put in a lot of work once you get them onto the battlefield. There's a deck called Amulet Titan that uses Amulet of Vigor, a 1-mana artifact with the ability where whenever a permanent enters the battlefield tapped, you untap it. And Primeval Titan to make a ton of mana very quickly and end the game with certain lands. Sunhome, Fortress of the Legion has the ability where you can pay 2, 1 red and 1 white to give target creature double strike until the end of the turn, meaning it deals combat damage before other creatures called first strike damage, and it deals normal combat damage. There's also Slayer's Stronghold, a land with the ability where you can pay 1 red and 1 white and tap it to give a creature +2/+0, vigilance, and haste until the end of the turn, meaning it can attack right away. What you do is play Primetime and find a Slayer's Stronghold to give it a stat boost and haste. Then you would attack and Primetime would trigger again, letting you go find Sunhome to give it double strike. However, this is only one way to use Primeval Titan's ability to your advantage. Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle, allows you to deal 3 damage to any target whenever a mountain enters the battlefield, if you control 5 other mountains. Not only can Primeval find your Valakuts, it can also find more mountains to trigger them. This will let you deal a ton of damage, clean up your opponent's board and ending the game quickly. These combos have led to Amulet Titan decks being one of the better decks in Modern for years. But there is still one other card with a Titan ability that's even stronger. And at number 1, we have Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. This is a 6/6 legendary elder giant with a mana cost of 1, 1 green, and 1 blue. It has the abilities where you can pay 2 green and 2 blue and exile 5 of the cards from your graveyard to escape it, which, as you might remember, allows you to cast it from your graveyard. When it enters the battlefield, you sacrifice it unless it escaped. And whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you draw a card, gain 3 life, and then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Uro is Kroxa's far stronger cousin, and is strong for a lot of the same reasons that card is. It keeps coming back and is a huge threat that's very hard to deal with efficiently. However, unlike Kroxa, who tries to deny your opponent resources, Uro gives you more resources, which makes it way better. Getting to draw an extra card every turn does a ton of things, such as letting you protect your Uro, fill your graveyard with more cards to cast it again, and put more pressure on your opponent to try and end the game. On top of drawing you cards in late game to keep pulling you further and further ahead, early on in the game it can also ramp you to let you make bigger plays. On top of both of these very, very strong effects, it has the additional upside of letting you gain life. This normally isn't the biggest deal, but it works perfectly with both of Uro's other abilities. By gaining life, you make it harder for your opponent to burst you down in aggro mid-range decks, meaning they have to play the long game. And of course, Uro excels at keeping you in the long game with its recursion and card draw. Uro does so much for so little that it kinda took over most of the formats it was printed in. Uro was banned in Standard, Pioneer, and Arena's closest equivalent to Pioneer, Explorer, and Historic, as well as in Modern. In all of these formats, Uro made green-blue decks way too good at playing the late game, meaning all they had to do was play some interaction to help shore up the first few turns. In Legacy, one of the last formats where it's allowed, Uro is a powerhouse that still sees play to this day. Seeing how successful this card has been, it easily takes a top spot on this list. Alright, and that's the list. Now, this is probably the last time Kroxa or Uro will show up on a list, as they've been in a few of them now, and they usually show up together. So they sort of make for boring videos, so we'll be adding them to our internal ban list for these videos going forward, where we just don't talk about them anymore other than just mentioning, yeah, these cards are good, but we don't need to explain how they work again. Anyway, if there are any other cards you think we may have missed, or have ideas for future videos just like this one, please leave them in a comment down below.